That's helpful to hear, because I think I know there's a huge stigma placed on people who have gone through trauma, whether it's, from mental health to sexual trauma. And to your very
Yeah.
point, men are not taken seriously when they express how the trauma that they've been through. And one example that comes to my mind from a couple years ago was Terry Crews. And I don't know his
Yep.
entire story, but I also know that he was a very loud voice that, to me, it seemed like people were trying to shush, because it
Yeah.
just does not happen to men, which of course is not true. So
It's not true.
being able to hear the way you process that is extremely helpful. And next time that I do hear somebody who has gone through that, is going to help me be just a little bit more empathetic
Absolutely.
toward them. So I very much appreciate you sharing that. And when you talk about, toward the beginning of that, you talked about you started the process of healing, and I want to know if you can expand upon that a little bit, because obviously it is a very long process, and I
Yeah.
think when it comes to anything in life, it's something that we have to put in the work to accomplish, and I think that's hard for a lot of people, no matter what it is, whether it's for our benefit or whether or not it's just for healing. So
Right.
what did that look like for you when you started that process?
It was tough. It was not easy at all. I was afraid. I honestly, it was the scariest thing I'd ever done in my entire life. Getting married, nah, I'm good with that.
Yeah.
Riding a roller coaster that I'd never been on, at Disney World or
Yeah.
whatever, or flying on a plane when I was like, none of that stuff compares
Right.
to this particular segment of my life, because I knew, and here's where the fear happened. What is everyone else going to think when this story comes out?
Yeah.
What is going to happen to my family when they hear the story? Because I had never told my mom, I had never told my dad, I had not told anybody in my family what had happened. And what's funny is my wife and I have been going through so much emotional things that I had been sort of trying to get through, that, my wife, she called my mother up, and said, you got to come talk to your son. And literally, a year ago, or yeah, about a year and a half ago, my mom came up here, and I spilled it all out. For the first time in 30 years, I lay in my mom's lap and I completely cried.
Yeah.
I just let it all hang out, because we're taught not to cry. Men,
Right.
boys don't cry. That's for
Right.
girls. You don't express them. You don't express that emotion. So we don't know how to deal with stress, and this is where anger creeps up. Anger is the byproduct of us not being emotionally intelligent.
Right.
We don't know how to deal with the stress. We don't know how to recognize it. So the first step is recognition.
Right.
That's step number one. You've got to be at the space to decide. That's like, okay, I have to set the intention to deal with this now. Once you recognize it, then number two is set the intention. What is the intention now? Vadim Zeland calls intention the willingness to have and to act. So this is where you set that course, like, okay, this is where I'm going. And then you set that focus. If healing is the outcome, truly, how deep does your agreement go? How deep does your yes to this particular process go? Because you've got to say yes to it, and you got to mean it. And if you say no to it, understand that whatever answer you give to this scenario, you're going to reap those repercussions. You're going to reap those benefits, whatever you want to call them, whatever the byproduct of you saying yes or no is. So you've got to admit something is wrong here. Something is off here. I'm not going to say wrong, because wrong and right is just more judgment, but something isn't settling. Something is not settled. The foundation is a little bit too shaky. We got to work on this thing. And then that's when you go into, okay, I see I have a problem. I'm willing to deal with it. And I'm willing to say yes to the process, however long it takes. How deep does your yes go? And that's where it hangs. It hangs in the balance of us. I'm like, we are the one, like, there's nobody else that can do that work for us.
Right.
You've got to do that work. I mean, I know it sounds redundant and it sounds really oversimplified, but you can go to all the self-help, conferences, and you can read all the books you want. But if you don't put your feet to the asphalt and start moving forward with some sort of change, I promise you, you will stay exactly where you are. you will be in that rut forever. And if I can use the proverbial story from the scriptures of Samson, you will be blind, not knowing that your hair has grown back and you're still milling out corn.
Yeah. Yeah. It's that first step. That first step
Yes.
is what I think people are most afraid of it.
Yeah.
Even
Yeah.
in the smallest degree, when it comes, I mean, I deal with that on a daily basis. When it comes to starting a new project for a client, it's that first easy,
Yeah.
sometimes easy little step that I need
Yep.
to make. And then once I start making that step, it's not hard to start walking
No.
and then running. But you have to,
It snowballs,
Yeah.
but you got to start.
Absolutely.
You got to start. And
Yeah.
and you know, it's I have this formula I created called the creation formula. I call it the CIA. Creation equals intention times action to the fourth degree. And it's sort of like I actually taught a little bit of this, like a 12-week course I did for a personal development company. But I call it the creation formula because it's how it breaks away from the law of attraction talk.
Yeah.
Because law of attraction just says law of attraction, gimme, 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 gimme.
Right.
You know, you
Right.
you think about what you want and you get it. No. There's some work to be done here. You've got to check some things out. So like it sort of gives me my checks and balances. Alignment is the first A. So like I said, C equals I, A to the fourth degree. First A is alignment. All right. And then you ask these questions. How did you learn how to identify where you are, identifying where you want to be, and positioning yourself as the observer. So this is where you start to learn how to pull back and stop identifying with the trauma,
Right.
and pull back from it as the observer of it. And then you stop feeling into it, right? Because the more you feel into something, the more a part of it you start to become, and then you start replicating it, right? So you want to pull back from it. Number 2 is attunement. What are you listening to? What are you watching? Right? Finding that, and how do you find the remote to change the channel? What does that look like? And then you want to check what you've agreed to. What have you said yes to, and what have you said no to? This is where you start checking heart-brain coherence. And this is where you start understanding that the field is where you're planting seeds, and the field is just a field. It only gives you back what you plant.
Right.
Right. And then you start to understand the agreements of thoughts, feelings, and emotions, and why those things bring you what your experiences. And then last but not least, it's allow. And I say allow by, what I mean by allow is what you're surrendered to. All right. What is how to recognize the power of letting go, checking what that means, right? Dissolving excess potential and all of that other stuff. We put a lot of attention into trauma so much that trauma becomes everything when it's just a tool. It's a tool. It's actually fuel to get you where you need to be if you know how to use it properly.
Yeah.
So that's how I check myself. That's my alignment point. That's like what I would call my formula for repositioning. And when you're willing to do that kind of work, okay, asking those questions of yourself, okay, so what am I identifying with right now? Right? What am I aligning to? Who am I listening to? What am I watching? What am I allowing into my sphere of influence that is now orbiting me, that I've pulled into my gravitational field, and it's orbiting me, and it's become a part of my solar system, if you will, my star system. What have I done here? What have I said yes to? What have I agreed to? And what have I surrendered to? Or what have I not surrendered to that I'm not experiencing what I really want?
Oh, that's awesome. I'm going to have to go back and listen to what you just said a number of times, because I mean, it's a really great formula, and I think it helps to answer the question that you brought up a little bit ago when you ask yourself if something feels off, if something doesn't feel right, because we may not always see that. We may have an inkling in the back of our mind, but if we are distracting ourselves with work or with family or with relationships or with alcohol or other drugs that you can abuse, it's not easy to see that something is off. Other people may see it, they may try to bring it to our attention, but if we don't want to accept it, it's just not going to happen. So using that formula, I mean, that seems like a great way to be able to do that.
Yeah. It's helped me personally in so many ways, because it puts the responsibility back on you to make the shift, not on someone else.
The Mosaic Life podcast is available on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Check out the full show notes at themosaiclifepodcast.com and sign up for the Circle newsletter for exclusive access to podcast content.